He was Hitler's top spy masters. But when the Third Reich collapsed, he didn't vanish. He switched sides, not to survive, but to control the world's next intelligence war. This is the untold story of Reinhard Gehlen, the man who built the CIA's secret bridge to Nazi Germany. The final days of the Reich, 1945. The sound of distant artillery echoes over the smoking ruins of Berlin. The once proud banners of the Third Reich are burning, and in the chaos, one man is planning his escape, not to flee, but to reinvent himself. Colonel Reinhard Gehlen, head of the Foreign Army's East FHO, Nazi Germany's top intelligence unit for the Soviet front, sits in his office, surrounded by maps, reports, and the sound of a dying empire. His eyes are calm, his hands steady. While others are burning their files, Gehlen is saving his. "We may have lost the war," he whispers to his aide. "But the next war has already begun and we will be needed again." Gehlen wasn't just a soldier. He was a strategist, one who knew the Soviet Union better than almost anyone in Europe. He had spies in every corner of the Eastern Front, from Ukraine to Moscow, and he had collected a treasure trove of intelligence that no one else possessed. When Hitler's empire crumbled, Gehlen didn't destroy his archives. He carefully packed them in steel drums and buried them in the Austrian Alps, waiting for the right moment. The arrest that changed history. In May 1945, Gehlen surrendered, not to the Soviets, not to a firing squad, but to the Americans. He walked into captivity with confidence, and when interrogators began questioning him, Gehlen offered something they couldn't refuse. "Gentlemen," he said, "I can give you everything you want to know about the Soviet Union. Every division, every commander, every movement. All I ask is a deal." The Americans, led by U.S. Army Intelligence G2, were cautious at first. A former Nazi officer offering cooperation sounded dangerous. But this was 1945, and the Cold War was already beginning to take shape. The U.S. needed intelligence on the Soviets, and Gehlen had it. He offered his entire network, his maps, his files, and, most importantly, his agents still active behind the Iron Curtain. In return, he wanted his freedom, protection for his staff, and a chance to rebuild his intelligence unit under American supervision. The Americans agreed. Operation Rusty, the secret deal. The CIA didn't exist yet, but American intelligence officers were already preparing for the world's next big confrontation. Gehlen's proposal was codenamed Operation Rusty. He and his top officers were quietly transferred to a U.S. base in Bavaria. There, under American funding, Gehlen began rebuilding the Gehlen Organization, a secret spy ring that would later become the foundation of West. Germany's intelligence service, BND, his mission, to collect intelligence on the Soviet Union, East Germany, Poland, and the entire Eastern Bloc, and hand it all directly to Washington. The Americans had effectively hired Hitler's spy chief to become their own. The Cold War's first spy network. Between 1946 and 1955, Gehlen's organization expanded across Europe. He recruited former Wehrmacht officers, SS men, and even captured Soviet agents who agreed to switch sides. The Americans provided money, equipment, and protection. In exchange, Gehlen delivered priceless intelligence reports, troop movements, communist networks, political analysis, and early warnings of Soviet military buildup. Washington loved the results. "Gehlen is our most valuable asset in Europe," wrote one American colonel. But not everyone trusted him. Inside the U.S. intelligence community, some officers warned, "We are building our new spy system on the bones of the old Reich." And they were right. Many of Gehlen's recruits had Nazi pasts, men who once worked for the Gestapo, the SS, or had committed war crimes. But in the shadow of the Cold War, morality was blurred. To fight communism, Washington looked the other way. The KGB strikes back. By 1949, the Soviet KGB learned about the Gehlen Organization, and they didn't waste time. Soviet moles began infiltrating the network, feeding false information and sabotaging operations. At least a dozen key agents were captured or killed behind the Iron Curtain. But Gehlen remained untouchable, protected by the Americans, and later by the newly formed CIA. When West Germany was officially established in 1949, the CIA recommended that Gehlen become the head of the new country's intelligence service. Thus, in 1956, his organization officially became the Bundesnachrichtendienst, BND, the German Federal Intelligence Service. Reinhard Gehlen, the former Nazi spy master, was now a respected Western intelligence chief, funded, supported, and protected by the United States. The price of the deal. But the past never stays buried. Throughout the 1950s, journalists and rival spies began uncovering traces of Gehlen's Nazi connections. Files leaked, testimonies surfaced, and the question echoed across Europe. How could the West trust a man who served Hitler? For Gehlen, the answer was simple: because they needed him. He often said in private, "Ideologies come and go. What matters is intelligence, and who controls it, the web of shadows." The Cold War tightens. By the early 1950s, the world had changed forever. Berlin was divided, the Iron Curtain stretched across Europe, and the CIA had become the ultimate power broker. At the heart of this new espionage war stood Reinhard Gehlen, the man who knew too much. His Gehlen organization was now the eyes and ears of the West, feeding Washington with intelligence reports that shaped U.S. policy against the Soviets. But behind the reports, shadows were growing. Some of Gehlen's officers, many former Nazi operatives, were secretly manipulating intelligence for personal profit, smuggling war criminals out of Europe, and even selling information to rival agencies. The Americans began to suspect that their golden spy might not be as loyal as they believed. "We trusted a ghost from Hitler's army," one CIA officer later said, "and we never knew which side he truly worked for." The KGB infiltration. The KGB wasn't sleeping either. By 1952, Soviet intelligence had planted deep moles inside Gehlen's network. The most infamous was Heinz Felfe, a former SS officer who had joined the Gehlen organization and was secretly working for Moscow. For years, Felfe passed top-secret NATO and CIA reports directly to the KGB, while feeding Gehlen false information. Every plan, every code name, every agent list leaked to the East. When the CIA discovered the betrayal in 1961, it was a disaster. More than 100 agents vanished overnight. Entire operations in Eastern Europe collapsed. Felfe's exposure was a turning point. Washington realized that the Gehlen organization was deeply compromised. "It was a nest of snakes," said one American analyst. "We had built our intelligence bridge to the East." On rotten wood, the birth of the BND. Despite the chaos, political necessity kept Gehlen in power. In 1956, under pressure from Washington and Chancellor Konrad Adenauer, the Gehlen organization was officially transformed into the Bundesnachrichtendienst (BND), the West German Federal Intelligence Service, and Reinhard Gehlen became its first president. The Cold War demanded information, not morality, and Gehlen delivered, using networks in Eastern Europe, refugees, and double agents to feed both real and fabricated data to NATO and the CIA. He became a powerful figure in Bonn, a man with friends in Washington, London, and even the Vatican. To the public, he was invisible. But inside the corridors of power, he was known as the Shadow General. Scene 4. Operation Gladio and Secret Armies. In the late 1950s, Gehlen's BND quietly joined Operation Gladio, a NATO-backed secret program to create stay-behind armies in case of Soviet invasion. Gehlen's agents trained civilians, stored weapons, and built communication lines across Western Europe. Officially, they were patriots. Unofficially, they were part of a covert web of anti-communist resistance, answerable only to a handful of Western intelligence chiefs. But as the operation expanded, so did the danger. Many of these secret soldiers included ex-fascists, Waffen-SS men, and radical extremists. Once again, the line between democracy and dictatorship blurred. Gehlen was playing a dangerous game, using old ideologies to fight new enemies. The CIA turns cold. Scene 1. Washington's doubts. By the early 1960s, the honeymoon was over. The CIA's senior officers were beginning to question the reliability of Gehlen's reports. Analysts noticed that much of his intelligence on Soviet military strength was exaggerated, often designed to make the Red Army look stronger than it really was. Why? Because fear meant funding and more power for Gehlen's agency. The CIA began to suspect that they were being manipulated. "He told us what we wanted to hear," one retired CIA official admitted. Not what was true. Worse, the Soviet moles had damaged BND's reputation beyond repair. Several U.S. senators began to question America's alliance with former Nazi officials. The moral cost of the Cold War was beginning to show. Scene 2. The power struggle in Bonn. Inside Germany, Gehlen's enemies multiplied. Young officers in the BND saw him as outdated, a relic of the past who still operated like a Wehrmacht colonel. They wanted modernization. He wanted control. Tensions exploded when journalists began exposing Nazi links inside the agency. Gehlen tried to suppress the leaks, even ordering counterintelligence units to investigate reporters, a scandal that nearly cost him his post. By the mid-1960s, Chancellor Ludwig Erhard was under pressure from both the CIA and German Parliament to remove Gehlen. But Gehlen refused to go quietly. He reminded everyone that without him, the West would have been blind in the first years of the Cold War. "I built this service from ashes," he declared, "and no one will take it from me." Scene 3, the fall begins. Then came another shock. New documents revealed that Gehlen had suppressed evidence of Nazi war crimes among his senior staff. Several top officers were former Gestapo agents who had escaped justice under his protection. The revelation was devastating. Public trust in the BND plummeted. The Americans distanced themselves, and the CIA quietly began replacing German intelligence sources with their own agents in Eastern Europe. Gehlen's empire, once the backbone of Western espionage, was crumbling from within. Scene 4, the end of the Shadow General. In 1968, Reinhard Gehlen was finally forced to resign. He left the BND in disgrace, still respected by some, but mistrusted by many. When asked later if he regretted working for the Americans, he replied coldly, "Regret? No, we all served a purpose. History will decide who was right." He retired to his home in Bavaria, writing his memoirs and occasionally advising Western agencies from the shadows. But his legacy remained haunted by a question that no one could answer. Did Reinhard Gehlen ever truly change sides, or did he simply survive every side? Legacy of a double world. The Scene 1, the death of a spy. Reinhard Gehlen died in 1979 quietly, in the Bavarian Alps, the same mountains where he had buried Hitler's intelligence files decades earlier. He was 77 years old. At his funeral, few officials attended. No state honors, no flags, just a handful of former agents standing in silence. But his ghost never left. The intelligence architecture he built, first for Hitler, then for Washington, still shapes the modern spy world today. Scene 2, the moral dilemma of intelligence. Gehlen's story forces the world to confront an uncomfortable truth. In the Cold War, morality was optional. Both East and West used men with dark pasts to serve their cause. The Americans justified it as necessary for survival. The Soviets did the same. But in the end, both sides inherited the same disease: secrecy, deception, and the illusion of control. Scene 3, the hidden legacy. Historians later discovered that Gehlen's files, his buried steel, drums uncontained information that influenced CIA operations for over 20 years. Many of his networks in Eastern Europe continued working until the 1980s. Some say the BND's early success was built on those archives. Others argue it was a foundation of lies, a recycled Nazi machine wearing a democratic mask. Whatever the truth, one fact remains. Reinhard Gehlen turned defeat into power. He lost a war, but won a second life. He wasn't loyal to Hitler or to Washington. He was loyal to intelligence itself, the art of knowing what others don't, and surviving because of it. As the Cold War ended, the West finally realized that many of its secrets came from the mind of a man who once served the enemy, the spy who changed sides, changed history.